Hey guys, Alan here. Solid Rock Bible class. Hey, glad you're with me. Um, as you can tell, kind of different background today since construction work happening with one of my neighbors and lots of noise outside. So I thought we'd just do this inside. A little fireplace chat, I guess you could say. Um, so let's remember in prayer a couple of people. Sam Sampson, who's had surgery that we need to remember. Also, I really reach out to our church family here on my assistant, my office manager, Melody Amos, and for her family with coronavirus. Melody is in the hospital. I think this is her 12th or I think it's her 14th day, excuse me, of being in the hospital at this point, and she's not progressing real well. So really take and pray about that. But we're going to be talking about being perceptive. As Christians, we need to be perceptive. I think probably a verse that kind of sticks out here, if we look into the book of 2 Corinthians, the 5th chapter, in verse number 7, it says, "For we walk by faith and not by sight." Sometimes the things that we see can scare us. Sometimes the things we see and the things we hear, we distort those in our mind. And we have to remember, we walk by faith and not by sight. You know, as we look at God's plan for each one of our lives, and He has a plan for every one of our lives. He also has a knowledge in regards to us of what we are going to do. Doesn't mean He forces us to do it. We have that free will. But God knows exactly what our life's going to bring. And many times, we just have to walk by that faith and not by sight. Believing in God, following His direction as He gives it to us, and realizing all these problems that we run across, God knew about them from the foundation of the earth. All the situations that God has put us in place with. You know, I was listening to somebody speak the other day, and they talked about something that was kind of interesting. And it was talking about a tarantula. You know, it's funny, a tarantula has 8 eyes, but its vision is extremely poor. But what he does have is this keen perception. And it's because of those hairy legs that he has, and they're extremely sensitive, and he knows some of his prey is coming way before they ever get there. He can sense it. You know, many times with us in our spiritual life, many times we've got to come to a point that we can sense God's will within our life. And how do we do that? We're going to talk about a little bit later, but the way we do that, it's through our prayer life, our Bible study. It's being in tune with God. Because many times our eyes and our ears are going to distort things because we're going to take and see something, or we're going to hear something, and then we're going to process it wrong in our minds. It's faulty. So we need to rely on God in our daily lives. And we can take and sense God's will in our life if we're just willing to live by faith. That's how we do it. We live by faith. Also, one of the things I think that makes us more perceptive than anything else, and that is the fact that we need to be thankful. And I've talked about this before. We need to be thankful and thank God every time something good happens. We need to thank God many times when some things we think are bad are happening, because God has a plan here. Nothing is foreign to Him. In Psalms, the 100th division, verse number 4, he says, "Enter into His gates with thanksgiving into his courts with praise. Be thankful unto him and bless his name. That's hard to do sometimes. Bless his name. Sometimes things aren't exactly going the way we want them to, and it's hard. But the Bible, the psalmist tells us, be thankful. Colossians, the 3rd chapter, verse 15. And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also ye are called in one body. And then he says, and be ye thankful. So let's talk a little bit about perception. Let's kind of get back to where we was at here. And because perception, it's an extremely powerful thing. So many of our actions, they're determined by how we perceive things, the way we process things. You know, how we perceive it, it's based on what we think, what we hear, what we see. But many times see our perception of events and words and people, it can be really wrong, can't it? Why? So let's kind of look at perception here. So as we look at perception, we've kind of already defined it here, but you know, to be aware of the thoughts and our senses, to see, seeing things, hearing things, tasting things, smelling things, feeling things. We have all of those senses, and then it feeds the mind. And then our mind processes it. So I think we kind of have to understand our senses are involved here. And many times we can come up with a computer error here, something that is not right. Anytime I think our mind is involved in things, that computer I just mentioned, sometimes it can take and be distorted. So we need to be aware as we look at the book of Romans, the 12th chapter. By the way, I'm going to be like all over the place this morning. But in Romans, the 12th chapter, in verse number 2, it says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove that which is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. Look at how that we need to work our perception. First of all, we need to make sure we're not conformed to the world. Second, he says here that our lives have to be transformed. They have to be changed. And how does that happen? By the renewing of our actual mind. And then when our mind is renewed, using God's word, God's principles, the following and leading of God, we can prove that which is good and acceptable and what is the perfect will of God here. So until our mind is completely renewed, our perception has the potential to be distorted, to give us the wrong answer. And let's look at a couple of things here as far as spiritual perception. In Deuteronomy, the 29th chapter, verse 4, it says, yet the Lord hath not given you a heart to perceive, and eyes to see, and ears to hear unto this day. See, he's talking in Deuteronomy, and he says, our carnal, earthly mind is not ready to properly process things. You know, this is an account of Moses' words to Israel, and we skip down to verse 29 of that same chapter, Deuteronomy, the 29th chapter. And he says, the secret things belong unto the Lord our God. But those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever, that they may do all the words of this law. So to get the right perception, we have got to take and make positive that we're following the Lord our God here. In Isaiah, the 6th chapter, verse number 9. By the way, I'm going to be all over here with scripture, if I haven't already told you that. I'm going to be doing a lot of jumping around. But Isaiah, the 6th chapter, verses 9 and 10. He says, and he said, go and tell this people, hear ye indeed, but understand not, and see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their eyes heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and covet, and be healed. We have to be careful of, as I say, our normal senses. You know, many times when it comes to God's word and when it comes to God's thinking here, our senses are dull. Our hearing is dull. We kind of hear what we want to hear. We see what we want to see. We feel what we want to feel. Our senses are dull. In Matthew, Jesus is speaking here in Matthew, the 13th chapter, verses 14 and 15. It says, and in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, by hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and not perceive. Verse 15, for this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing. Their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their hearts, and should be coveted, and I shall heal them. God is willing to take and step in and heal our minds. But it comes by that renewing of the mind we talked about. In Mark, the 8th chapter, verse 17. And when Jesus knew it, and he was talking about here, his disciples at this point were confused, okay? It says, and when Jesus knew it, he said unto them, why reason ye? Because ye have no bread. Perceive ye not, yet neither understand. Have your heart yet hardened? In verse 18, having eyes, see ye not. Having ears, hear ye not. And do ye not remember? So his disciples were confused totally. And he took and he was talking to him. He says, why can't you understand this? If we look over into the book of Luke here, in the 6th chapter, verse 41, he says, and why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but perceiveth not the beam that is in thy own eye? See, many times we take and we find fault with somebody else, but we're not willing to look at our own lives. We don't perceive that we may be much worse than they are. In John, the 4th chapter, in verse 19, the woman at the well, it says, and the woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Well, in reality, it was the Son of God she was talking to. In Acts, the 10th chapter, then Peter opened his mouth and said, of the truth, I perceive that God is not a respecter of persons, but in every nation he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is accepted with him. Let's put the story here just a little bit with us. As we look at Peter, Peter has just had this vision. And he keeps, in this vision, there would be this cloth come down, and there was unclean animals in there, and he was a Jew and he wasn't supposed to eat these types of animals, and it said kill and eat, and he said, oh no, I never do this. Then he took and he awakened out of this dream, and he awakened out of this dream to some people at his front door. And now he comes to the conclusion of how God was speaking to him even before these people, these foreigners, came to his door. And he says, of a truth, I perceive that God is not a respecter of persons. Prior to that, I think Peter really thought it was only going to be the Jews that were going to be saved. But in reality, it was the entire world. In Mark, the 4th chapter, verse 11, and he said unto them, unto you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but unto them that are without, all these things are done in parables. See, we are allowed to see some of the mysteries of the kingdom of God, and it's because of our spiritual eyes, our spiritual thoughts. It's the transforming of our minds. He says, but these others, they have to learn in parables because they can't understand biblical things here. And I think that's true even as Christians. Many times we don't understand God's things, his thoughts, his reasoning. Many times I think it's going to be really neat when we get to heaven one day and we can see what some of that was and why some of that occurred. In verse number 12, he goes on, that seeing they may see and not perceive, and hearing they may hear and not understand, lest at any time they should be coveted and their sins should be forgiven them. So Jesus said, he says, they don't understand because they don't have these spiritual eyes. And I think, people's perception, even of the church, when you look at people's perception of God's people and the people of the church, they sometimes, they don't understand. I think we have some ability to perceive, and I'm not saying perfectly at all. So how that we perceive it determines our thoughts, our words, our actions, like we talked about. Our behavior, it's based on our perceptions. How do we respond to people? How do we respond to places? How do we respond to things? It's a result of how we perceive things to be, and not always the reality of what things really are. So, as I said, different people, they have different opinions of Christianity. They have different opinions of the church and how it functions. So many times when people think about the church, they think of it kind of as a hospital, something to patch people up when they're broken, get people off the drugs, get people to a point of having a good family. Other people will take and think of it as just this organization where everybody kind of gets together and meets and greets and has a good time. Kind of a family atmosphere. Other people think of the church as an army that's going out attempting to take and slay the world and the sinful world. And in all reality, the church is all three of those. It's a hospital, it's a family, it is an army. So what had Peter been doing when he first took and received that revelation concerning Cornelius? If we look back at that in Acts 9:9, it says Peter was praying and he was seeking for God at that particular point in his life. See, that's kind of where we've got to be. We've got to have that mindset where we're seeking God's will. I think one of the reasons we often experience or mistaken perception, I guess you could say, is that we do not see through the eyes of God, but we see through these carnal eyes, and that's just, we have to realize that's natural. But our goal is to break through that. Because when we see through these carnal eyes, we're going to judge with these carnal eyes. We're going to process it through the brain, and it's not going to be right. And according to John, the 7th chapter, verse 24, it says, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment." So perception, by definition, I guess you could say, it means we receive something from the outside. We hear it, we see it, we feel it. And it passes through all of our senses, through the mind, and can get into the heart. But then we look at something a little different. We look at discernment, on the other hand. And it's revealed by the Spirit of God of truth into our heart. And then it passes to the mind. So one passes from the outside in. The other is passing from the inside out. In the book of 1 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, and pick up a couple of verses here, picking up at verse 9. It says, "But as it is written, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, nor hath it entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him." Verse 10, "But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. For what man knoweth the things of man, save the Spirit of man, which is in him? Even so the things of God, knowing no man but the Spirit of God." And then verse 12, "Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know the things that are freely given to us of God." That verse 12, it really takes and rings home, doesn't it? Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit of God. That's the part we need. See, the Holy Spirit, it's given us the ability to evaluate here. It'll cause our mind to be renewed. Carnal perception, it can take and cause our mind and our heart to be defiled, tainted, hardened. In Psalms 119:11, it says, "Thy word have I hid in my heart, that I might not sin against thee." We need to put God's word in our heart so that we filter things properly. You know, many times Jesus, like we talked earlier, he talks in parables because the people couldn't understand. They didn't understand. Because I think Isaiah said it probably the very best. If we look at Isaiah, the 55th chapter, verses 8 and 9. It says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither my ways your ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." And if we take and jump down here, staying in the book of Isaiah, in the 64th chapter of the book of Isaiah, and we look at verse 4, he says, "For since the beginning of the world, man hath not heard, nor perceived by the ear, neither hath the eye seen, O God, besides thee, that he hath prepared for him that waiteth for him. We have great things in our lives if we will take and just listen to God, to follow him. Jumping kind of back over into the New Testament here in 1 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, verse 16, he says, "For who hath known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ." As Christians, we have the mind of Christ. Now, we have to develop that through his word. But he's given us the mind of Christ. So what are some of the keys, I guess, to better spiritual perception? First of all, of course, it's going to be our spiritual life, our prayer life, the life we spend reading God's word, what we do to worship God. In Romans, the 12th chapter, verses 1 and 2, I think we all know the two verses here, but I'm going to read them. He says, "I beseech you, brethren," excuse me, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And then verse number two, and it's the key to it all. "And be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, that ye may prove that which is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God." When we look into the book of 2 Corinthians, he talks about this warfare, this spiritual warfare. And in the first 4 and 5, he says, "For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God, to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringeth into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ." So we need to take and meditate and think on, the Bible says, good things, godly things. Remember what the psalmist said, "Thy word have I hid in my heart, that I might not sin against God." See, we need to take and we need to allow God to take and just open these windows of heaven, pour his knowledge into us. But it's not like he's just going to take and unscrew the lid and pour it in. It takes some effort on our part. We've got to listen to God's voice. We have to read God's word. We have to meditate. We have to have a good prayer life. In James, I'm going to end with this. In James, the 1st chapter, verse 5. He says, "If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given to him." All we have to do is ask. All we have to do is ask. Remember, I had asked for a couple of prayer requests at the beginning. And let's remember Josh Sampson. And I know he is out of the hospital and recovering. And I know the family of Melody really would covet your prayers here in regards to Melody Amos. And she is, I believe she's on her 13th day in the hospital with coronavirus, and she is very bad. So I know that the families on both of those would covet your prayers. And I'm going to end with that. I will catch up with you next segment next week.